Okay, good.
Hey Yehudi, welcome to the show. So the guys from weMove, very generous of them to create a platform for me to interview some guests. And when they said, who would you like to interview? First of all, it was Katerina. I've got to interview Katerina. And then I had in mind Josie, who's a positive discipline coach. And then the third in that set was Yehudi Gordon. So here you are. And I talk about you a lot in previous podcasts that I've done, numerous podcasts actually, about this 77-year-old guy that blows away social norms. So I discuss your morning routine generally. What I'd like to do is, rather than me say it, just so there's any disbelief out there from any of the listeners of previous podcasts, can Yehudi take us through his morning routine to the point where you get to work?
Okay. First of all, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, love hanging out with you.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we've done that for a few years now.
Yeah, it's been excellent, man, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Some transformations along the way, right?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I'm 78 because I count my years from conception day.
There we go.
I was conceived on 9/11, so I believe I came in around there.
Mm.
And so in the morning, I usually wake beforehand, but the alarm goes off at 5:45, and I normally spend about half an hour in bed, just finding out who's here today.
And welcoming him at the door. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Bit of Rumi in there.
A Rumi, yeah.
Yeah,
There's that a lovely Rumi poem.
Yeah, man.
And I really believe in the internal family system. And so I'm never sure which one of my personalities is going to be there in the morning. Very often it's an anxiety personality. Often start the day like that. And I don't get out of bed immediately. I'm usually out of bed by about...
Yehudi's a popular guy. He's already got a call coming in.
I'm usually out of bed by 6:15, and the first thing I do is I go downstairs, heat the kettle, and make tea for myself and for Wendy.
Wendy's Yehudi's wife.
That's and she's a longer sleeper than me, so she's usually in bed. And then I come into the next door room, which is a combination of a study and gym and just hangout room. And that's like my shed. But it's a shared shed because it's Wendy's shed too. And so I come in there and I've got a mat, one of those black gym mats. And I put a half roll, like this one, and sit there and start the day with 100 breaths. So it's 30, 40. At the end of the first 30, I hold my breath for whatever feels comfortable.
And so there's cycles of breath. So one cycle is an inhale and an exhale.
That's
for the
correct.
audience,
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
For as long as I feel comfortable. If the anxious personality is there, then usually I can manage about 22 seconds. If the calm...
As a hold? Is this a breath hold?
As a hold, as a breath hold.
Okay, so if those aren't familiar, that's a round of 30 cycles. That's an inhale, exhale. After the exhale, then you're doing a breath hold, aren't you?
That's correct,
Yeah.
at the end of the 30. And if I'm feeling really chilled and not anxious, I can get up to 40, sometimes even a minute. And then when the breath comes in, I just love being in that space when and as the breath comes in, and usually it's again sometimes up to 30, 40 seconds, and so I do 3 of those, the 30, 30, 40. That's 100.
Yep, 100 cycles.
And then after that, I do what I call my Tony routine.
Talk us through the Tony routine, come on.
Yeah. So I have, so in the doorway to the study, there's a bar.
That's a pull-up bar.
A pull-up bar, yeah. And I'll usually hang for about 25, 30, up to 45 seconds. And so I do that, I think usually at least 5 minutes, between 5 and 10 minutes of hanging during the morning routine. And then I often start the morning routine with the rewilding of the feet, the exercises that you showed me.
Yeah.
And
so they're mobility drills for your feet, basically. Yeah. To open up the feet.
No, actually I don't. I almost always start after the hang, putting 2 broomsticks down and actually squatting. And during the squat, I have cards which are like tarot cards. And I ask the cards to give me the message of the day. So while I'm squatting, on the black mat, because I think the black's really good, it's a good place to get in, and then I open up the cards, and there's a way of opening them up. So I get 4 cards.
So this is like a morning ritual bonus reel now, because I've never mentioned this before. Here we go. This is new to me as well. Here we go.
And then or if I have a question, I'll say, tell me about, or for instance this morning, tell me about where I should be coming from, or not should, forget the should. Guide me in where I'm coming from when I'm talking to Tony this afternoon.
What should I be receiving?
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but yeah. Well, I am actually receiving from the cards, because that's the message, yeah.
We're all receiving, huh?
Definitely. And this morning I had some. It was one of the cards is a truth. There were a couple of truth cards, and then one of the cards was, be careful, the con man can appear. So Tony, if you find the con man walks in during this conversation, will you just?
I'll slap him.
Slap him. No, just slap him. Yeah, good idea. Slap him.
I'll chuck some water over you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
So the squat usually takes about 10 minutes, sometimes 15. It'll depend, because if the cards, depending on the message of the card, so I'm sometimes guided to close my eyes and go in and get a message from inside of me. So it can be up to 15 minutes, sometimes less. And then I have a morning routine, which is the 5 or 6 foot exercises. I've got 6 kettlebells upstairs, and I often do, and maybe 4 or 5 times a week I do a deadlift with going from 12 kilos to 40 kilos. And I use the wall as a prop, and I actually set the timer. That's right. So I set the timer for 55 minutes. So I have a 55-minute workout, and oftentimes at about 40 minutes, I start to feel tired. In which case, I'll actually do something quieter.
Yeah, get some mobility in at that stage.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I don't lift weights.
No, just work with body weight.
Apart from the kettlebells, and I have 3 or 4 routines that I do on the overhead bar. And the overhead bar has made a massive difference to me, because I was quite stooped. And now I feel that I can sit. Am I sitting straight, Chris? I can sit straight. I can walk straight. So that's the morning routine. Then I go downstairs and make breakfast. And the breakfast often consists of 2 eggs and loads of green stuff and a few tomatoes in this gorgeous olive oil. And we know exactly which farm it comes from in Crete. brought in by a friend.
Nice.
Yeah, really nice. And so I have what I consider a really healthy breakfast, and I take vitamins and minerals, because I think that it's useful for me. Take them about 5 times a week. And by this time, Wendy's usually come downstairs, and we'll have a fairly short breakfast together, maybe 10 minutes. And then I'm busy getting my stuff together. I've got a backpack for my day's work. And then I'll often put 2 carrots in and an apple. and this morning I put pak choi in, because I think that's really...
And you're not doing the smoothie anymore, because you used to do a huge smoothie, didn't you?
Yeah.
That was like prebiotic, probiotic, symbiotic.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Primordial soup, almost.
I've gone off them a bit, because I actually quite like chewing the food.
Yeah, of course.
I like the taste of chewing the food.
Yeah, well, even if you're having liquids, the suggestion is, like with smoothies, is to chew it, so you get the enzymes going, right?
Right.
And then so you chew your liquids, and you drink your solids. So you chew the solids until they become liquid.
Yeah.
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 There you go.
Yeah, nice. So that's made a massive difference to me, and since we've talked, and I watched Terry Wall's podcast, who I think she's amazing.
The Wall's Protocol. Yeah, I mentioned it in a few podcasts before.
Yeah,
I think
and she's incredible. She's a MS sufferer.
Yeah,
and she was on massive medication, and she stopped all the medication, changed her nutrition, and got off a wheelchair and rode a bike up a mountain.
Well, studied cellular biology in the meantime, right, to get to that process.
Yeah, she did.
Then she knew exactly what cells need.
Yeah.
So no guesswork. It was literally right. Boom. This is what we need.
Yeah. And the reason I love her stuff is so simple. It's a third.
Yeah, but also just to show people.
Yeah.
This is where she was and this is where she is now. Who can question that,
Yeah, and so oftentimes when I'm consulting, if anybody talks to her, I'll talk to everybody about the way they eat. And I can show the podcast in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they can go home and everybody can watch it.
And show everyone else, exactly.
And for some people it's transformational.
Oh, of course. Again, it's like anything. If they're open to listening to it and seeing it and hearing it, then they're away, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, so carrots, apple in the bag, in the rucksack.
Carrots, apple, pak choi, or whatever's around. And then I put my barefoot shoes on and walk out of the house and walk to the tube.
So Yehudi's been wearing Vivo barefoots when did we first meet? 72?
Yeah, it's at least 6 years.
So 6 years in Vivos now. Okay.
Yeah. Or maybe longer, yeah.
Yep.
And in fact, I've got some other shoes, I can't wear them.
No.
Even the wide campers, I can't wear them.
He's outgrown his shoes. Shoe collection.
I just can't wear anything else. And then I walk down to the tube. So sometimes, because I live sort of close to Golders Green and further from Hampstead, and sometimes Wendy and I and our dog Hero will walk up to Hampstead, which is about a 25-minute walk through Hampstead Heath. And that's fantastic. And the two of us have got 2 trees that are our trees, 2 old oak trees that are 360 years old. We walk past, say hi to the trees, sometimes a little tree hug, and then go on to the tube in Hampstead, or if there's less time, then I walk down to Golders Green.
Yep. Let's get to the exciting tube park, come on.
Yeah, but I don't call it Golders Green, I call it heaven.
Yeah.
Can I tell you why?
This is great. Okay.
Can I tell you why?
Please do, man, because I love this. I'm sure everyone else is going to just be blown away by it.
Okay.
If the tarot cards didn't get them, this will.
So if heaven is on earth, right?
Yep.
And so then I think to myself, well, what's one of the grottiest places that I know of? And it's a tube station. It's really, it's really grotty.
Yeah, man.
So imagine being in heaven in Golders Green tube station.
Yeah.
And every time I walk into Golders Green tube station, if I'm speaking to somebody or I'm whatever, I always say, I'm going to heaven. and it's actually made quite a big difference, because I actually think that
And it just
it
completely
is
shifts
heaven.
your perception of the environment. It's great.
Yeah,
It's a great tool, huh?
yeah. And then I wait for the tube. So because I go to Warren Street, I can get the first tube that comes. I can go the Charing Cross or the Bank Line, and then change it at Euston. And for some years now, I do not sit on the tube. And previously, I've been hanging and stretching, but now that my back's a bit looser, what I do is I do maximum of 280 breaths between Golders Green Tube Station and Warren Street. And sometimes the tube gets blocked, it gets blocked, say, at Camden Town, and there's a bit of a wait. And so, but my normal is 210 breaths. So it's a cycle of 30, hold, breathe, 30, hold, 40, hold. So that's the first 100.
There we go.
Yeah.
So that's had an upgrade, because the podcast I did with weMove, my first one, and I was mentioning, I was discussing you, and I said, this guy I coach, and this is his routine on the tube, and he gets on the tube and he hangs. When he's not hanging, he's then squatting, and if he's not doing that, he's surfing, and surfing would involve just standing there not holding on to anything. And now we've upgraded, now we're on to breath work.
But I love the feeling, I love holding, and I love the feeling of being holding symmetrically, because you can do that on the tube. And it's the perfect height and everything for me. Yeah. And then when I get to Warren Street, I go into Pret to get a salad.
Yeah.
And then I make my way to work, and I work as a doctor. And so I spend a lot of time sitting between 9 and 5 in the evening. And this is a whole area that I haven't really approached. So I don't yet have a facility.
We haven't managed to transform that yet. It's not like you haven't taken responsibility, because the thought's there, right?
Yeah.
It's just
correct.
actioning at this stage, right?
Yeah. And for me, I have to look at a computer screen, because all my records are on computer. Because I'm so used to it, I handwrite my notes and look at the other person.
Yeah, but I think there's also that, isn't it? That although it's your journey and you might be ready for standing desk or squatting or ground rest positions, as we've been going through for a period of time like we are now, doesn't mean the patient is, or even aware of.
I know.
So you have to honour them, really, don't you?
Yeah,
process.
Yeah, definitely.
That's one of the challenges I find.
But one of the things that I find really difficult is to leave myself even 2 minutes between, from one client to the next, to just come back, because the computer pulls me out.
And what do you do? What do you squat in that time? What are you doing?
Well, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going from one to the next.
Yeah.
And so squatting's a really good one, or kneeling.
Yeah.
I like kneeling.
I mean, that 2 minutes that you're giving yourself from one patient.
Yeah,
to the
but
next.
I haven't done it yet. But
okay.
That's the plan.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like me setting timers with people if I'm talking in office spaces, or like with Santander, I did that big one. It was just take responsibility. It's your desk area. It can be, you can have a growth promoting desk area or compromising one.
Yeah.
Setting a timer is great. Maybe 25 minutes to it.
Yeah.
But if your sessions are, how long are you with patients?
Or
is that
of 30 or 45 minutes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Then if it's 30 minutes, then you've got 2 minutes rest between that.
Yeah, and I actually have a standing desk at home. So when I'm home, I never sit and work.
No.
Often squat, but frequently stand.
But this isn't how it has always been, right? So I met you when you were 72.
When I was 72, I was very stooped.
And what did you get?
And the first thing I walked into the gym, to Glove's gym, and I said, Tony, you've got to teach me how to walk.
That's right, man.
So I'm over 70. I've never learned to walk.
So up popped Yehudi on the treadmill. We recorded you. I recorded you.
Yeah.
And what came out of it was suddenly that, oh my God. Is that what they look like? And that's the seed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then we just went through a process. So it was like feet, ground work,
Yeah.
Vivos.
Yeah. But you've also evolved.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
It's been a massive, it's been a journey, huh?
Yeah. So my experience is that in the early times, I was expected to do something.
Yeah.
There was an expectation all the time. Whereas now it's much more of it feels like a dialogue more than an expectation. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I mean, it hasn't always been that way. So leading up to that, we did a workshop and Chris was there. We did the ice bath, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
And that was a real process to coach you through it.
Yeah, definitely.
So are you happy going into that?
The ice bath.
Into the let's start from what the process was going into the ice bath, what the trauma was.
Yeah.
What the experience was leading into it.
Yeah, okay. So for the ice bath, it's something I've always wanted to do and been terrified of doing it. I believe that my terror is stored and has been stored since I was born. Because at birth, it was immensely long, incredibly difficult, and I died in the womb with the cord around my neck. And the obstetrician pulled me out, and I was sort of not symmetrical, so I've still got a mark on my skull at the back here, from where I got pulled out.
So was it forceps or something? Was it
forceps? Yeah.
Okay.
So I was dead and being pulled out, but even after you're dead, your nerves work, and then I got pulled out and resuscitated with oxygen. And in those days, and even now, they blow cold oxygen onto newborn babies who just come out of the out of the swimming pool. And after that, my mum was really quite ill, and then I was left in this cold incubator. So I'm absolutely terrified of cold, terrified. And the other reason I think that I'm terrified of cold is related to, because I was born around the Second World War, related to what people went through as prisoners of war.
Yeah. So their trauma, their PTSD.
Their trauma, and I was aware of like people freezing to death in Russia when I was little, from one of my earliest memories.
So you're around that kind of language and information and behaviour,
yeah.
absorbing it.
Yeah. So I was terrified of actually going into the ice, terrified. And I remember thinking of going to a weMove thing in London. I didn't go. Thinking of going to the one that he was going to do at the Roundhouse. I didn't go.
A huge one, 750 people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't go. And then when your one came up, was that the first one you'd done?
I think it was the third.
The third. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So you did a couple.
Yeah.
I saw the ice bath.
The baby.
And I thought,
the rebirthing pool.
I thought, no way. I've got to do it. I've got to do this. So we discussed that rules was in March, wasn't it?
Yeah, March 30th.
March 30th. And then I got to about 2 weeks before it, and I thought to myself, can't do this.
In came a new visitor.
And so in my morning meditation, I turned over the cards, and one of the cards I got was Fire of Sacrifice. So it meant I had to sacrifice the fear in the fire, and decided to do it. And I remember we were supposed to be there at 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'm usually on time, but I arrived 5 minutes late. And the look of appreciation on your face, Tony, was great, because you thought I was going to opt out.
Well, I left a really long message with you the day before.
Yeah, it was good.
Because you're almost out at that stage. It's like, I can't do it, man.
Yeah.
I think, what was the message? I think the message was, I'm petrified. I think was the message. Terrified, that was it.
Yeah,
the
terrified.
experience.
Yeah. It's taken me a long time in my life to actually admit to being terrified. I've often felt it, but it's taken many years to actually have show that vulnerability.
It is the vulnerability. It takes courage, right?
Yeah.
Say, hang on a minute, I'm absolutely terrified of this situation.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about really deep trauma there, aren't we?
Yeah,
You know?
deep, yeah. And there's a lot of brain science to show now that those memories are stored deep in the brain.
Yeah, like the book, The Body Keeps Count.
Yeah.
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 And that they stored in the midbrain, and they stored next to the amygdala, which is the emotional part, so that any one of those triggers, like ice, would trigger in me within 1 second the feeling that I had when I was born.
Yeah.
It takes 1 second. So anyway, I arrived. I remember it was a cold day. I was wearing my anorak and everything, and then I was feeling very nervous. And the day was great because we did a lot of movement.
A lot of play.
And movement play.
Stirred up lots of happy hormones. That was great.
It was, definitely. And then we had nice food to eat.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, the breath work.
With Arthur.
With Arthur, yeah. And there's something trustworthy about Arthur. I can trust him. I feel safe with him.
Yeah.
And then I asked him some difficult questions which he couldn't answer, but I forgave him. About nitrous oxide in the nose. I mean, what's all this nose breathing?
Because I don't think anyone knows yet. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
So they're all a bit nervous around that one. How do I answer that? Do I actually know the deep science of it yet?
Yeah. And because I'd known about nitrous oxide and about antioxidants, so I really wanted the information. I seriously wanted. I tried to find it. I haven't found it yet.
That's the intellectual Yehudi. There we go. Yeah. Let's go back into the emotional Yehudi.
Okay, so then we got to the breath work, and then to the pool. And I was the second in. So there was one person got in before me. And I looked at you, Tony, and I thought, this is it, man. I've got to do it now. I didn't think that. I thought another word, but I won't say it on the podcast.
Say it.
Say it. Okay, I thought, fuck, I'm going to do this. Yeah. And so I had my shorts on and got in. As I got into the water, there was this numbing pain in my thigh. It was like on either side of my pelvis was this numbing pain. I thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, my penis surrounded by this numbing pain. and then I thought, whoa, hold on, just hang out and listen to the man. And Arthur was fantastic. He took us through each breath, every single breath. And opposite me was a much younger man. He looked very fit. I thought to myself, he's going to last this no problem at all. I'm going to be out of this in, I think, how many was it, 60 seconds?
No, it was a 3-minute round, I think, Arthur had
3 minutes, okay. I'm going to be out of here and I'll never do it. In the meantime, halfway through it, I started to relax in it, and the guy opposite me started to look more and more terrified. So he'd taken on my terror.
He sucked it in.
Made it easier. And I stayed in there, and I just feel that very amazing having done that. So thank you for setting it up. So I got out and just, yes, I did it. And then I looked at Tony, and Tony looks at me and he says, you'd got to do it again. So I had to wait for the next guy to finish, and then I had to get back in. So I did 2 rounds.
And then the roar came.
Yeah, and then
I remember the roar. And that was the trauma.
Yeah, that was the trauma coming out. Yeah.
But it's interesting, this process around trauma, is it, and where it leads us. So I think for the audience who don't know, so Yehudi is the author of Birth and Beyond, right? And I always say that you're one of the pioneers in rewilding childbirth in a way back into the UK, bringing natural birthing back in.
Yeah.
But you you went through a real process of that, didn't you? There was a bit of
Yeah, I did.
ostracized within the process.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through
Yes. Yeah. So I have 3 children, and all of them were born in the medical model of obstetrics.
So the pharmaceutical surgical experience of childbirth. Right?
That's right, which had taken over virtually the entire world, not the rural world, but the entire urban world. And so there were inductions of labor using hormones. There were hormones to speed up the uterus. There's lots and lots of pethidine, which is a morphine type substance, and my Wendy was out of it, and I have no doubt that my kids were out of it, because I know what it felt like, because that's what happened to me when I was born.
There's an interesting one where I think his name was Winkle, and it was basically a study where they brought a primate in, and they put the primate through the same surgical medical experience of childbirth. So they were drugged, and the baby and the mother didn't connect.
I know.
Post.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Total disconnect, like cut off. Compared to what a primate would normally be, where they're straight on the mother and they can even grip on and hang on, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a significant number of women have post-traumatic stress after childbirth, and I had it as the child.
And do you think that's a contributing factor then, like what they picked up in that study? Do you think it's just the disconnect?
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who's been traumatized, strongly traumatized, can't connect. Just can't connect. Can we just cut for a second? Could do us a...
You can hear them. It's because you can hear them, right?
But
sure.
my hearing aid picks them up, so it's a bit disconcerting.
Thanks, man. Cool. Nice and relaxed, huh?
Yeah.
Some water.
Have a hit of this green tea. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
What time do we start?
You're at 34 minutes. Or 30 minutes.
We're at 30 minutes in?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Are you ready? Okay. And so I've always had a scientific orientation, and I'd stopped doing clinical work, and I was in a laboratory, and it was a very high quality laboratory, and I was part of a team that discovered a number of ways of measuring things. And one of the things that was measured is something which helps to find out whether someone's had a blood clot, and that's still being used. And this work was done in '74. So I had this scientific orientation, but so after about 4 or 5 years in the lab, I thought to myself, I don't want to be a test tube person for any longer. I've had enough of that. And I met up with a man who was 2 years ahead of me at school. And he was so his daughter was in my daughter's class. That's how we met again. And he was very involved in yoga, and he was a friend and I think patient of Ronnie Lang. Have you heard of R.D. Lang? R.D. Lang he was a famous philosopher, psychiatrist, and in the 60s and 70s. I think one of the books he wrote was In Search of Self. And Ronnie Lang said, the world's got this birth stuff wrong.
Mhm.
It's completely wrong. And then somebody saw a photograph of a primate giving birth. And this photograph was circulated. And at the same time, a woman called Ina May Gaskin wrote a book called Spiritual Midwifery, where babies were being born at home on this farm in Tennessee, organic farm. And Arthur said, "What are you obstetricians doing? Because it's all wrong." And I knew it was wrong. So if a woman is lying on her back, she's got like a 7-pound baby, another 2 pounds or 3 pounds of water, and the uterus, that's 10 pounds pressing on her artery. So less blood is getting to the baby. It's very uncool. The second thing is, if she tries to give birth on her back, can you imagine going to take a shit lying on your back?
Yeah,
it's not easy, right?
And a big shit, right?
And a big shit.
You know?
Yeah, it's not easy. And then from the baby's point of view, there's no gravity, so the gravity helps the baby to come through. Not while the waters are intact, but as soon as the waters are broken, then the gravitational pull is down.
Well, also just think in a way the contractions occur. So the contractions occur and they're pushing down lower and lower and lower and lower.
They are, yeah.
So with the assistance of gravity, that's got to, I mean, in terms of efficiency, right?
So if somebody's squatting, you've got gravity.
Yeah.
You've got full blood flow to not only to the baby in the uterus, but back to the mother.
Yeah, pelvis is open.
And her pelvis open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's back it up. I mean, how did it get to that point? How was it that childbirth got to the point where it became surgical and pharmaceutical? And also, why were babies being born on their backs?
The thing about being born, about the baby being born on the back, it goes back, I think it's over 200 years, to one of the French kings.
Yeah, Louis.
He said to the accoucheur, who was the obstetrician, in French for obstetrician, said to the accoucheur, I want to see, and I'm not prepared to go around. I want to sit in a chair and see the baby being born. Yeah? And then obstetrics, so birth got taken over by the obstetricians, who were all men.
So hold on. So the social norm of today of being born on your back was basically because one king decided that's how he wanted to view childbirth.
Well, it was a combination of that. It's a combination of that and the masculinization, or the dysfunctional masculine taking over the culture. And
not understanding the emotion and being sympathetic to the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why active birth is where women have reclaimed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so in the West, it gradually people were told, if you get born at home, it's dangerous, so come into the hospital. As more and more people came into the hospital, they had to make it into something that worked.
Yeah, like a machine, right?
As it
the conveyor belt.
So people, the conveyor belt, and so there were time constraints, there were staffing constraints. So the old 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, 2 midwives who would be maybe the granny and the village midwife would be with the mum, and her friends would be outside making tea or whatever. You had one midwife caring for 3 women.
So then you remove the elder from the situation as well, being the granny or the mother, right?
Yeah.
So that information gets lost, and then it's handed over to the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the midwives, midwives that it's a profession in its own right. But they became obstetric nurses. And when I joined the Royal Free, not all the midwives, but the majority of the midwives would only do something if the doctor allowed it. So the dysfunctional male, took over the whole ethic of delivery, and they were no longer called births. It was called deliveries. It's called obstetrics and deliveries.
Wow.
Okay. And when I joined the Royal Free in 1979, I think it was.
I was 4 then. Yeah.
As a woman was admitted into the labour ward in labour, the first thing that happened was that she'd be given an enema. Do you know why? It's to clear the poo out so that there would be a sterile place for the baby to be born into.
So there's the microbiome, huh?
Exactly. Then the second thing that would happen was that her pubic hair and labial hair would be shaved. Again,
Microbiome.
to keep it sterile.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that would happen in this particular one was the baby's water would be broken. Remember, it's not the woman's water, it's the baby's water, the baby's membrane. And this clip would be put onto the baby's head. So it's metal. It's like an earring, right?
What?
Put onto the baby's scalp, so that that could be attached to a wire, which would be attached to a machine that read the baby's heart rate.
What? That is insane.
And then you haven't heard it all. And then the woman would be asked to put her hand out, and an intravenous drip would be set up in case she needed the drugs, because many women did. Yes?
Yeah.
And then she'd be transferred into the labour room. And in the labour room, she'd have to lie on the bed, occasionally half sitting, sort of reclining.
Yeah.
Never allowed to get off the bed until the baby was born. And so that was the obstetric model.
And how many women on that ward, on the labour ward?
There would be something like, I think it was about 2,000 births a year. So that's we can work it out easily. So it's like eight a day, something like that. And some of the big ones, like in South Africa where I worked, there were 16,000 women giving birth a year. It's a real conveyor belt, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah. So when I got there, this mechanism which was stored inside of me around my own birth was activated. It was activated every single day, and often many times in a day. So I used to walk around in a state of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Of course, man.
And in a
You
state
didn't know that at
of
the
anxiety.
time, right? You know that now, or you knew that at the time?
Well, I knew
Now
how,
that you- now
I
you
knew
can
how
process
anxious
it.
I was, and I knew that this, and I also knew this is wrong.
Okay.
It was never
It's never okay with you.
It was never okay. That was never okay. And I was born in the Second World War, and these women were I couldn't see much difference between the way these women were being treated in labor and the way some of the prisoners were being treated in the war.
Well, that's what I read, is that there was a surplus of doctors left over from the war, and that's how they come about to then turning it into a surgical pharmaceutical experience as well. It was this.
I don't believe that.
No.
No, I don't think so. And then the whole birth system began to operate. So for example, it would cost, I don't know, millions a year just to run one obstetric unit. So you had to have the obstetric unit. You had to have the space. the obstetric nurses called midwives, the doctors, the ancillaries, etc. It was a multi-billion-dollar industry, and still is.
The machine, yeah.
And so if you look around the world, the highest intervention rate is where midwives are not delivering babies. Where men are delivering babies, you get, like in parts of Brazil, 95% cesarean.
Yeah, I thought they were ruling it in there that it was going to become compulsory C-section in Brazil, which was insane, right? If we're at 95%,
my friend Janet Velasquez has been out there.
Yeah.
It may be in some areas, but I don't know. And then they used to say, "Oh, yeah, the woman would say to the obstetrician, this is what I heard from one of the women, I want to have a try." He said, "Yeah, you can have 3 hours. But a first baby's never born in 3 hours. So that's 100% cesarean, isn't it?"
Yeah.
So this was intolerable, but my friend, my daughter Gabby's friend Kira, and Arthur, and he was then married to somebody called Janet Velasquez, and Janet was involved with. It subsequently became called the active birth movement.
Okay.
A woman called Sheila Kitzinger, the National Childbirth Trust, and this book arrived from America called Spiritual Midwifery, and there were pictures of somebody kneeling and giving birth. And so
up until this point, despite the fact you've been an obstetrician for how long at this stage?
Well, I qualified in 64. I started in 66, 76, 79, about 13 years.
13 years, and this is is this the first that you've seen a woman being born, a baby being born in a kneeling position that you've noticed in this book, or is it something you're aware of at this stage?
Well,
trying to go into what, because the social norms that we're conditioned into, right?
I was born in South Africa, and in the rural areas where babies were born at home, that was the norm.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, okay, but I'm sorry about the prejudice that's going to come out here.
No.
I'm white and middle class,
Yeah.
and my baby's born in a hospital.
Yes.
This woman is black, and she's from a rural area, so therefore the best way to be born is in the hospital, and the worst way to be born is at home.
Yeah, the natural way.
That was my model
of course,
of when I grew up. So I had to pull down a lot of barriers to actually get involved with this.
Mm-hmm. So the book arrives. Spiritual birthing. You see the kneeling position.
Yeah. But then I became friendly with Janet and a lot of her friends and some of the midwives in London, and then it just became impossible to practice in that hospital and not and keep people confined to bed. So the people who came to see me privately, we'd have the discussion, and I was the first obstetrician in the UK, and maybe in Europe, but certainly in the UK, to do where I was at a birth where the woman was kneeling in a hospital. But at that stage, we were not allowed to use the floor, so she had to kneel on the bed.
I love it.
And I know she her name's Annie, and she lives around here.
There we go.
Yeah. And then subsequently, so this was about 79, 80. In 1980, there was a very feisty American woman, and there's a lot of talk about this now. In the National Childbirth Trust.
What about what you're doing, or
no? About the dangers of lying down.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I'm friendly with the midwives and they used to call them active birth teachers. And one of the women who she wasn't actually my under me. She was a very feisty American woman, and the midwife said to her, "Stay on the bed." She said, "I won't. I want to squat." The midwife said, "It's too dangerous." So the woman said, "I want to squat." The midwife said, and this is, "If you want to squat, you squat, but first sign here that you take responsibility if anything happens to the baby." The midwife then sat on a chair, folded her arms while the baby was being born. Yeah?
Wow.
So this woman, I think her name was Ruth. This woman,
The American woman.
the American
Yeah,
woman,
okay.
gave birth, and all hell broke loose inside the Royal Free Hospital.
Well, because she's not squatting on the bed at this stage, she's squatting on the floor, right?
Yeah.
And kneeling's not allowed on
Yeah.
the floor at this stage.
So the obstetricians, the midwives gathered together, and it was pandemonium. Who gave her the right to get off the bed?
So I'm just bringing it up a bit. Go on.
You okay? Who gave her the right to get off the bed? This is dangerous. It's primitive. We're going back to primitive times and there was pandemonium, literally pandemonium. And I was one of 5 or 6 consultants, and it was 5 versus 1. Believe me, it was 5 versus 1. And they had a meeting called the cogwheel meeting. And at the meeting, I'm seated. They seated me on the end, and the other obstetricians all surround. And incidentally, the dysfunction, the social dysfunction within the obstetricians was massive at that stage in that department. They suddenly bonded together, like they knew what was right, and this was definitely not okay.
Biologically normal behaviour was just too primitive.
And just before the cogwheel meeting, this one of the senior consultant walked into the office and he said, "I heard about this." He said, and I can't remember. He was very sort of prim gentleman. He never swore anything. He said, "This is entirely unacceptable."
It's an outrage.
This is outrageous.
1 second. This is getting on with the mic. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I just
Yeah.
need to check it to make sure.
This is.
It's an outrage.
Have you got a cramp?
Yeah, cramp.
Huh?
Yeah.
Do you want a cushion? There's a cushion behind.
No, I'm good now. Oh, no.
Okay.
Okay.
So he said, and he said, the woman was nominally under him.
Mm.
She was talking to me about something called the NCT. So I said to him, "Are you not aware? This is called the National Childbirth Trust. They have communities in almost every part of the country. And this is what people do during the pregnancy and then afterwards as support. Were you never aware of that?" He said, "No." Anyway, so then the cogwheel meeting comes up, and there's unanimity that they're right and I'm wrong.
Yeah.
100% unanimous. And then at that stage, I'd been in post for about 2.5 years. And as a senior lecturer at the Royal Free, they had an edict which went back hundreds of years. After 3 years, you had to be not reappointed, but
It's okay, man.
Not reappointed, but approved, or whatever the word is. And and it was obvious they were never going to approve me. So I was gently asked to resign. It wasn't gentle, it was vitriolic.
Your time has come.
Your time has come. So I resigned, and it was like going into the what's the word when Christ went into the wilderness? There's a word for it. I can't remember the word. It was being completely ostracized, and there was a small hospital in northwest London called the Garden Hospital, which was in Hendon, and at that stage they were doing about 5 births a week. No, 5 births a month, one or two a day. I went and introduced myself to the director, and that was where the active birth movement, or the active birth place, started. It was an old house.
That was the birth of the active birth centre.
That's correct. It was an old house, and they gave us one of the floors, and so there were 4 like kind of bedrooms, and there were 2 other rooms which had a birthing pool, and people were free to walk and squat and do whatever. So that's how that all happened. And then that became the model, because now there are many, well over 20, it's probably many more now, of birthing centres in the UK, which are all midwife run, and but the original ones of those were based on this model.
There we have it.
Yeah.
So it is literally rewilding childbirth, isn't it, in a way? Handing it over to the midwives like that. I mean, it's on your recommendation. It was interesting because it's as you walked into our lives, I think we'd... Yeah, like Lola was born at not the Royal Free, she was born at St Mary's, their natural birthing unit there. And then you put someone on our radar, which was Joseph Chilton Pierce.
Yeah.
Which I think I discussed that with Katerina in one of the podcasts, which I was blown away by at the time. Can we go into that a bit? Because your Birth and Beyond is about 9 months and then the next 9 months, isn't it? It's about 9 months in the pregnancy and 9 months post-pregnancy. Yeah.
So it's the concept of the primal period.
Yeah.
The primal period is, and it's 18 months. So it's basically the first 1,000 days. Let's see, 1 year is 360, so it's about 500 days. But the whole concept is from that. That's why I count my years from conception day.
Yeah, the first 1,000 days. That's like the last trimester plus 3 years, isn't it? Is that what we class that?
No. So 9 months.
Yeah.
And so it's 18 months, 1.5 years. Each year is 365 days. So that's about 500 plus days. Yeah. So it's actually basically to the age of about 3. And the Jesuits used to say, "Give me the boy to the age of 7, and I'll show you the man." Yeah. So the primal period is of profound importance, as I have personally experienced. It's produced a lot of anxiety, but it's also produced
who you are today.
Yeah.
And think of all those births that have come beyond that, right?
Yeah. So the primal period, it's a very useful term. And then we took that for Birth and Beyond and decided to track women through pregnancy, into birth, and then for the next 9 months. So that's what the book does. So I worked with a professional photographer called Jenna Nakash, who had her baby was born on the birth unit, and with writers, co-writers, and we followed it. And then I asked a question of the pediatricians, the child doctors, said, how do babies see the world? How do they think? And they said, and these were people who were working in special care baby units and seeing newborn babies every day of their lives. They said, well, we think it's... I said, do you know? I said, no. So I actually had to go, and the very first chapter of that book is on how babies see the world. And I had to go and actually acquire this information. And then subsequently, two of the pediatricians, neonatal pediatricians, came up to me and said, we never knew that. You taught us that.
Wow.
It's quite cool.
It is cool, man.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So, with Joseph Chilton Pearce's work, he talks about like heart rhythms with the baby. And if the mother and the baby are separated, anything more than 12 feet, then the baby will become incoherent.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on that?
It's the primal period is time to be together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the primate, isn't it? And
Yeah.
if you look at the primates, they're together all the time. And there's a whole mythology around. It came out, I think, out of the US, which was, if you spend too much time with a child, you spoil that child. And then, as a result of spoiling the child, they become fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want your child to be a man, especially if it's a boy, then don't take too much notice of it and don't touch very much. And that became the social norm. So, for example, after I was born, we had so there was a separate bedroom for my mum and dad, and a separate bedroom for me. Yeah. And we carried that on with our kids, and our kids carried it on with their kids. Except that by the time my grandchildren were born, all of them had at least a year with their mum and dad.
So that would be the cot in the bedroom.
Yeah. And so Joseph Chilton Pearce is right. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. And in that lovely video of his, he.
Good. Yeah.
In the lovely video of his, they've got the waves of energy.
Yeah. It was mind blowing, that video, when you showed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it changed a lot for us.
Yeah, definitely.
That kind of brought in co-sleeping for us.
Yeah.
You know, we'd learned about that through continuing concept. Then it was like, aha, okay.
Yeah. And then the issue of, okay, so I spend on average about, hang on, I just need to switch this off.
If you press that one there, then you get it on silent, won't you?
Oh, which one? There you go. Oh yeah. Okay, good. I lost it.
I spend on average.
I spend on average, yeah.
Say again?
I was talking about continuing concept, having the kids in the bed, and I think you shifted to I spend on average, yeah.
Don't know. Lost it.
Yeah, because we were talking about the heart rhythms
Mm-hmm.
with Joseph Chilton Pearce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's, oh yeah, okay. So my children never stayed in the bedroom with us.
Mm.
My grandchildren stay in the bedroom with their parents, but my oldest grandchildren were, although they did that, that kind of total togetherness wasn't okay at that stage. Whereas now, my youngest grandchild, who's 1, her name's Phoenix, and her mom's just trained as a child art therapist, and so she's read Joseph Chilton Pearce and
Magical Child, yeah.
And she just hangs out with her daughter, and then the whole concept, and they breastfeed together, and then as soon as Phoenix was interested, she just was given whatever was on the table. So it's called infant-led weaning.
Yeah, so baby-led weaning, yeah.
Baby-led.
Yeah, nice.
Led weaning. And my view is that if I want my children to be confident, self-confident, confident that they're taking the right decisions in their lives, confident that they can refuse stuff, that's the way to do it. So Tanya's saying to Phoenix, look, I trust you. I trust you to know what you need. Here's some alternatives, and whatever you don't want, it's fine. And whatever you feel is right for you, take it.
Exactly.
I think it's a fantastic model.
It really is. I mean, it's also, you have to be mindful of the parent, don't you? And have a little bit of background on what the digestive system is ready for. Because I think when you pick up the book, which is Baby-Led Weaning, it still has loads of grains and wheat and breadsticks and stuff like that. And from my perspective, I always think that the gut is too early. You know, whereas if you get all the veggies in there and you soften them slightly, or you put avocado out, or then they can pick it up and they gum it and they go through that process of developing enzymes, and the digestive system is primed. So I think it almost needed like the next one, the next baby-led weaning. You know. Yeah. But
actually, if you think about it, it's quite sensible, isn't it?
Really,
you give a baby a very young baby a carrot. Or you steam the carrot, and then the baby can get into. It's so obvious, isn't it?
Yeah,
just common sense.
Of course it is, man.
Yeah.
Vivica, you happy talking about Vivica?
No, I'm not quite ready to go there. I will talk about it.
Yeah.
So. In the active birth movement, etc., Wendy, who I'm married to, as you know, she's very smart, and she's trained as a social anthropologist, and a number of the women who were giving birth, etc., and Janet, who were the yoga teachers, often used to come to our place, and we'd have food together, and Wendy made the point that some of these people had this obsession about having to be perfect mums. Had to do something perfectly. Now, that is a major problem for human beings, to be perfect. Really major problem. So
it's one of those personalities that turn up, as you say, in the morning when you wake up, the perfectionist might be there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if a particular person failed to have a squatting birth, it would be depression for ages. And so Wendy made the point that we were getting, and it was true, obsessed with the mechanics of birth. Yeah. And in many of the classes, and even the hypnotherapy classes now, there's an obsession with the mechanics of birth,
rather than the beings in the birth.
Rather than
yeah,
absolutely. And not only that, rather than the being, that's why I count my birthday begins at my conception day. So the being is being
Yeah, exactly.
before
Yeah.
birth, and then there's a transition, transformation, whatever word you want to call, and that same being is being after birth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the whole concept of acknowledging the being, rather than coercing the being, rather than, because most of modern parenting is about lying, and I knew what I wanted to do. I've got to turn this off, Tony. Most of modern stuff, it's about lying. Oh, how's your baby? Oh, fine.
Yeah.
All great, you know. Or and you know what the gold standard is? The gold standard is the number of hours that the baby sleeps.
Yeah.
That's the gold standard. So if my baby does a 10 and your baby does a 5, I'm twice as good as you.
Yeah, but also it's such a flawed model around sleep because having gone through continuum concept and having done co-sleeping with every one of our kids, right? People around us say, well, like neighbours we've had, it's funny, we can't hear the baby crying at night, or we can't hear you up in the night.
They don't have to cry.
Because we don't have to. They're not crying for us because they're in the bed with us, so their needs are met. They've got the bonding experience and they can have milk whenever they want.
Yeah.
And when they're super light like that, it would get to the point where it's ridiculous because the babies would make their way to the boob and Katerina would still be asleep. So we'd all be asleep in the same bed and the baby would find its way to the boob, you know. So we never had that experience of broken sleep, you know.
Yeah. One of my patients told me today, she said, I feel a bit embarrassed. Because last night, because I was asking about feeding, etc., the baby's 2 now. Last night, she said, I know the baby fed off me, but I can't remember.
There we are.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, I said to her, I said, you're so lucky.
Yeah.
You know, you and the baby have got this great, wonderful relationship, and yet you see yourself as not good enough. I said, that's so, yeah. Yeah. So... I
want to stay in there a bit because a friend of mine, Mark LaRouste, and he won't mind me saying this. I just remember they were in a bit of a state after the child was born because they were doing night feeds and getting up in the night and going through that process. And he's an entrepreneur, and his partner's an entrepreneur, so they were really suffered in those first early stages by having that separation of the child and having to get up to the night to feed the baby rather than inviting the baby in.
Yeah.
And so that unfortunately means that story goes out. So then it's another message of, it's such a nightmare when you first have kids and you're up all night and you're doing the feed and you're tired.
Well, it is a nightmare, isn't it?
Well, it is if you do the social norm, but if you go into what works in nature again, what would be in the primitive model as you were observing in South Africa, then that's would again be the norm, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So... in the birth world, or people who teach birth, etc., sometimes get very myopic, very focused on a mechanical event, and that's why I was pleased to hear that you've got people talking about parenting and expanding it.
Yeah. What came first? Was it Vivica or Babies Know?
So. Good question.
Because I only know you. I
96.
When you were 72, it was kind of wrapping things up with Vivica, right?
Yeah.
But then you had Babies Know as a model. But how early did Babies Know come in? And let's start with what is Babies Know. How about that?
Should we do that?
Yeah, man. I think we should do that. Otherwise, we're talking about it, no one knows what it is.
So my, the people who started Babies Know are my 3 kids, right?
Yeah. Because they knew.
And telling me how little I knew. So when I find out that I know nothing, then it's time to find out. So I've got that kind of inquiring mind.
Yeah. Well, you're spiritually connected when you realise you know nothing, right? Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah,
that's true. There's a woman called Kitty Hagenbach, and she gave birth to her son Max exactly 30 years ago. And it was transformational for her. That experience was transformational. Because she never wanted to have children, and here she was 42, and she had this marvelous normal birth. And then she loved her kids, etc., but went into a massive depression. I'd really like to talk to you about that. It's very important for this podcast. But she and I stayed friends, and then she started to retrain, and she retrained in child psychology. And then I invited her, because we used to hold these groups for pregnant women, to talk on it. And then I started to study the child psychology model, and we did workshops together about birth process workshops, and we started this thing called Babies Know. And do you know why we called it that? Guess.
Because babies know.
Because they do.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was the perfect name, right?
Yeah.
And we started it, and it was very successful. So I wasn't the theoretician. I was a practicing obstetrician, running an integrated healthcare service, running a birth unit. I didn't really have the drive to for this, but Kitty did. We hit a point where we had to write a book.
So have we mentioned Kitty up until this point?
No.
No. Okay.
Would you like to introduce her?
Let's intro Kitty.
Okay.
Who's
So Kitty is a wonderful mum of 2 children, who was a marketing person, retrained as a therapist. She's a holistic therapist with a special interest in the importance of what happens in early life and how it affects all of us.
And that's in the womb as well, right?
Well, it begins at conception.
Conception, exactly.
Or it depends on if you're a Buddhist, it begins in previous lifetimes. You bring it in with you. And so Kitty and I were running Babies Know, and we were getting quite a few people, up to 100 people over a weekend. But it wasn't really my thing. I was there as someone who loved it and who wanted it to be successful, but I didn't feel that I wasn't trained for it. I could not, given my medical training and all the things that go with that, couldn't put myself out as she was the expert.
So you're feeling inauthentic at that stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was the expert, and then the things, the concepts, the Chilton Pearce concepts, etc. The Babies Know was used as its model. Then came into many other into parenting programs, etc. And so Babies Know came and went over about 15 years.
Okay.
But many people, I still meet people who say that it had a profound influence on who they are and who they are as parents.
Yeah, because wasn't Kitty weren't you bringing in like family constellation work into that as well?
Yeah, we were.
Babies Know?
Yeah, we were, definitely.
And how does that work with the baby?
Hang on, before we go there.
Yeah.
So Babies Know was Kitty and myself, and Kitty had a very profound depression when her children were young. And this is really important, because what happens to parents, men and women, after your child is born, where I'll just use myself as an example. When my oldest child was born and she came into our bed at the age of 2, I just had this they had this moment of intense jealousy and anger, and it related to the time when my brother was born and I felt excluded.
Yeah.
So I know I keep going on about this because it's really important. All of us have got these memories that are stored.
Yeah.
But there's a defect in the education so far. Because the way the memory is stored is when it's activated, it's not in time. So for example, I walk into my bedroom and I see my daughter in bed with my wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfectly normal thing.
Yep.
If you walked in, Tony, you wouldn't have a problem. You just say, fine, thank you very
My
much.
perception would be different to yours, yeah.
Completely. I walk in and suddenly I've got this burst of anger and jealousy and envy. And that dates back 72, or no, I was younger then, but say 40 years earlier.
Mm.
And that memory is stored in my implicit memory. It's stored deep in there. But when it's activated, it's in the right brain. It's in the emotional brain.
Mm.
It's not in time. So if you ask me, what were you... so ask me the question, Tony. What were you carrying when you walked into that room?
Dr. Yehudi, what were you carrying when you walked into that room?
I was carrying a tray with tea and breakfast for us. I can still remember that.
Mm.
So I can still remember the day, etc. That's in the left brain memory.
Yeah.
But the feeling that came up was not in time. I thought that I was actually feeling something that happened there, but it wasn't. It was just activated something that had happened more than 40 years before, but I was unaware of this.
The relationship to it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I've had this conversation with many, many people, and it isn't actually in the culture at the moment yet.
Well, I read a lot about this through Bruce Lipton's work. He talks about those first 6 years of life.
Correct. Yeah.
And that they're the templates that we're recording.
Mm-hmm.
So then the first 1,000 days, that's like the deep emotional stuff, isn't it? That's the real...
First 3 years.
First 3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Last trimester and 3 years.
Yeah.
That's the real deep-rooted emotional stuff that a lot of us are operating at.
Yeah, I agree. But I've listened to Bruce Lipton.
Yeah.
I've read him, but I've never heard him say that's not stored in time, and that I've never heard him teaching people how to recognize this.
No, he recognizes it, but doesn't. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so, I've had this experience, but in different forms, 10,000 times.
Yeah.
And I don't recognize it. Every single time I don't recognize it. So until
post the event.
Until post the event.
Yeah.
Well, most times I don't recognize it at all, and a few times, a tiny minority, post the event. So what I'm doing now is I'm really have a commitment to recognizing it when it arises.
So what would your advice be to someone that's recognizing an event like that? Would it be to sit in it, do the work? How would you process it?
So I'll do a role play.
Yep.
And this is not the truth, it's just what's going to come out, right?
Yep.
Okay. The role play is I walk back into that room 40 years ago,
Yep.
or whenever it was, and I'm carrying the tray. I see my wife, see my child, and this feeling of anger arises.
Towards your sibling.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right, yeah. So I stop and I say, what was that? And then I look around and I say, it's got to be related to food, a young child, and a mother. What is that for me? Of course, my brother. But so if I do that now, it's easy, right?
Mm.
But maybe in half an hour's time, I'm going to be trying to do something, and so it needs awareness.
Yeah.
And so I don't have that yet. I do have it in retrospect, but I find it very difficult to have it in the moment.
Yeah, I mean the level of which you'd have to be present.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's more and more distraction in the world, right?
Yeah. So I'm pleased that I've said that. But what happened to Kitty and her depression was because when she was, I think it was the child was 2 or 3, she was left alone at home, and her mother and father would just disappear. Mum would disappear for hours or days, and so her depression was, it revoked those memories. And then I take my hat off to her. She didn't just let it lie. She worked it through.
Yeah, stayed in there.
Yeah.
I think it's the same even with language, isn't it? I will hear myself say stuff, and I go, "Fuck, that's not me. That's my dad, or that's my mum." You know, and you know it's happening in those early years. You just get a gentle reminder of it.
Yeah.
And then sit back, and that's where we went with positive discipline. I feel that's a good tool for that.
Right. So in the baby's no, before it ended, it was bringing up a lot of these feelings in me, but I didn't know how to process them, and I hadn't. I was just starting to learn the theory, and then, but no, even up to now, nobody said to me, "Well, look, it's not in time, so therefore it's got to come from the past." It's been said, but it hasn't been put into a context of everyday, moment-to-moment existence for me.
Yeah.
But I always see myself as a bit weird, so I don't know.
I don't see you as weird, man.
Okay.
I don't think the audience will see you as weird,
Okay.
or hear you as weird.
All right.
You know, because it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, those recordings in the early years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's picking up on what Chilton Pearce has said, but he was picking up on what the Jesuits said 150 years ago.
Yeah.
They knew it.
Yeah. So is that answering the family constellation?
Okay. So, right.
Because I know Kitty was working with dolls, wasn't she? I remember you doing one at the studio.
Yeah.
You did a baby's no, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. So Kitty believes she's quite Buddhist actually.
Yeah.
And I am too. So I believe that I brought in with me energy which is not from now.
Yeah.
There's a new but very ancient branch of psychology, and it goes something like this. There's a family system.
Yeah.
In the family system, the family has an energy. So I could use myself. Shall I use myself as an
Please
example?
do. Go for it.
Okay. So in my family, my mum and dad both born in Lithuania, both emigrated to South Africa. My mum was quite young; she was 13. My dad was old; he was 18. My mum came with her mum and her dad was there with her mum. My dad came without his parents at 18. It's quite something. And then that was in the 20s and 30s, and then I was born in 41, and the war was coming. Yeah. The war was there when I was born, but it was coming.
Yeah.
And they were profoundly petrified because my mom had actually starved in the Second World War and nearly died. My dad had been a refugee before the First World War. So it was, it brought up stuff in them. Yeah, terrified. And so in the family system, there was something that wasn't being expressed, because my dad would never come and say, "I'm terrified. Every time I hear a bomb, I can remember we were in the train or whatever, you know." So it was in the family system, but it was secret. It was not completely secret, but it wasn't overtly expressed, and the
Yeah.
vulnerability was never expressed. So Tony, do you agree I'm a nice guy?
You're a nice guy, man.
I don't want to be a nice guy anymore,
No.
believe me. No. So I, as a young man, or as a child, I was surrounded by this. It was my stratosphere, it was my atmosphere. And in the family system, in the theory of the family system, I see the secret. I know the secret's in me. I have to represent it in the family. Yeah?
Yeah.
So for me, doing the family system, I used to have a vitriolic hatred of certain people. And the vitriolic hatred was projected towards the SS guards, who were so abysmal to the prisoners, particularly and my family, my mom's family, everybody who was left in Lithuania was murdered on one morning, 2 weeks after I was born. So I took that on, right?
You're carrying.
So I became the representative of that in our family.
And all the trauma of.
And all the trauma. And that has had very positive effects because, started Vivica, which is the integrated health center, became one of the important people in the active birth movement.
One of the pioneers, right?
Yeah. And so it arose from that. Yeah? That's quite good. It's nice and important. But it had another effect. It created a lot of anxiety in me. And
it's
also
the morning practice to deal with your anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. And also a lot of anger towards it was actually racist. Anger towards this person's a member of that group, I hate him or I dislike him or whatever.
Yeah. Well, difficult to have compassion at that stage for anyone, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I did a family constellation in which I was asked to stand aside. Somebody was chosen to represent me. So suddenly I saw our family in action from the observer. I'd never done that before. Really powerful. Then somebody was chosen to represent my mum and my dad. And then somebody was chosen to represent the family members that were murdered.
So should we unravel that a little bit? So you're sitting in a circle.
So we're sitting in a circle.
Yeah,
I'm outside the circle.
Is there? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a leader called a constellator.
Yep.
Who's leading the thing.
Yep.
Somebody represents my dad, and he's never met my dad because my dad had been dead by then.
It's just someone sitting in the circle.
Somebody was asked, said, "Would you be kind enough to represent Yehudi's dad?"
Yeah.
Somebody, my mum.
Well, you pick them, yeah?
No, the constellator picked them. I think I picked the first one to represent me.
Yeah.
His name is Paul. Nice guy.
Okay.
And then so Kitty was one of the people who were murdered. She represented that. And then amazingly, there's a family energy that comes into that circle. And I saw the man representing my dad, and he used the same signal with his hand as my dad used to use. He'd never met my dad. My dad was dead. I don't use that particular signal.
But he's channeling your dad, right?
And he channeled my dad. And Kitty channeled and fascinatingly, the perpetrators who did the murder and then the murdered, the victim said, "We're at peace."
Yeah, of course, man.
The perpetrators, 2 of them were young boys, and they were not at peace. They were really hassled. And then there was a third one, who was a woman in her sort of 40s or 50s. She said, "We didn't kill enough of them." And I thought to myself, I've got a lot of work to do because this is still being held in the constellation.
All of that's in you, right?
Yeah.
All of that's in you, that whole conversation. So you're carrying the two soldiers at that point, you know, who are carrying the guilt and everything else.
But the difference, Tony, is I'm standing outside and I'm seeing it
but now
happen.
you can see what's happening.
That's the difference.
It's like lifting Yehudi's head off, lid off your head.
Yeah.
And seeing it all.
But actually seeing it. But not even like a movie, because this is in 3 dimensions.
Mm.
It's in 4 dimensions because there's also movement.
Like watching some Shakespearean play, right?
Yeah. And then since then, my hatred of the particular group who did the murdering has virtually disappeared. And so I'm much more at peace with that. And especially knowing that the people who were murdered were actually at peace. They were. So that's an example of the constellation. Now, Tony.
Yeah.
Okay.
How does that come in?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right.
How does it come into babies? No.
Yeah. So before my first child was born, I hadn't done any of this work, right? That meant that this energy, this anger, this energy, was part of me. I've released some of it. I mean, I've still got some of it, but I've released some of it. So doing the constellation as a preparation for childbirth is fantastic, because at least some of the family energy, the family system energy, can be released, and then the new person doesn't have to represent it.
Yeah, and if you think of those traumas, I mean, not just those wars. I mean, think what came before that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's all passed down in that ancestral line.
Yeah.
Until we clear it, right?
And so, so within the family system, they believe that it's the people that you can see. If you're Buddhist or whatever, you think, well, okay, it's those, and then it's whatever my past lives had to. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to the Dalai Lama, he says he's seen 10,000 of his past lives.
Yeah.
He's experienced them. So I love doing that work because I think that it's so much nicer than carrying that stuff around.
Well, it's like you said to me before I discovered, you introduced me to family constellation. You said, don't do it for you, do it for your kids.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And that's including your kids that aren't born yet, right? That's the whole point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that babies know the constellation led to this, to Tanya's relationship, or our relationship with Phoenix. It's just so loving and chilled, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah, doing the work.
Mm.
Being the change, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I'm very fortunate because I knew my grandparents, I knew my parents, I know me, I know my kids, and I know my grandchildren, so I can see 5 generations.
Yeah, easier to weave that together in a constellation as well, right?
Yeah.
If you have a little bit of backstory going in.
Yeah.
I remember that from my constellation, the first one, going in, and thinking, oh my God, I don't have the history, I don't have the knowledge that some of these people have in here. And I even remember saying to Nicola at the time, do you know, I don't feel like I have the trauma that these people have here, you know. And that was it. As the gateway, she said, "We see," you know, almost with a knowing nod, and then it all unravelled. Incredible.
So, what's helped you in your life, having experienced that?
Again, it's compassion. I think it feeds that. You know, you suddenly start to see, that relationship. That's why that's happening. This is why that's happening. That's where it was coming from. Yeah. And in that instance, it went back so many generations.
Yeah.
And which I'm now kind of pieced together as probably Nordic Celt ancestors
Right.
that were on a raping rampage or something like that, you know. That's kind of where it came to. I did another constellation with a guy called Mark at 42 Acres.
Mm.
And he had this thing where we were in a line. There was probably about 8 of us, I guess, in a line, and we'd have to keep walking backwards.
Mm.
And he'd go through the years, and you had to imagine yourself walking through your ancestral line.
Yeah.
And I ended up in what can only be explained as kind of that really aggressive Viking kind of energy,
Yeah.
going through a whole village, just
Yeah.
chopping and killing people. And it was kind of in me, you know. It was like that was me doing that. It was me. That action was me. That's where it was going.
Yeah. Well, I've been a Roman soldier,
really powerful.
sticking a sword into a newborn baby.
Wow, man.
That was. But to think that's, you know.
And it's not just, you know, it's not just the issue holder, it's the representative as well. Like every one of those, every constellation I've been involved with, I'm the dad.
It's funny, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
A dad in each and every one of them.
Yeah.
You know? And some crazy stuff again, because you could go into it quite cynical really at the beginning when you first go, but I think once you're pulled in as a representative and you start channeling whoever it is within that room, and it's me, usually I'm the papa, right? So I'm channeling whatever's going on, and suddenly I've been hit by grief, but I've never experienced grief. Like Tony himself hasn't had grief, but the papa who Tony is now representing has had grief, so I'm channeling that, and I've gone through a process where I'm completely collapsed on the ground and my heart is broken, you know. I'd never experienced anything like that. I couldn't even get up, you know. It's broken down in tears, you know, until it was cleared.
Yeah.
And then of course imagine what that's clearing, that to remove that grief from that family. I mean, potent, right?
Marvelous. And it's possible that in some previous life you went through that.
That's why you're there as the representative for it, right? Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, wonderful stuff.
So we brushed on Vivica. Do you want to talk about Vivica?
Yeah,
what was Vivica?
Vivica was an integrated health centre.
Because I'd heard about it just like as an a celebrity kind of place to.
Yeah. So because the birth unit and active birth became quite popular among a certain group of people, so quite a lot of film people, music people used it, and so the active birth unit, the birth unit, started in 1980, and Vivica started in 96. And the reason that I started it was that we needed a place where we could have a meetings hall. So every Wednesday, people would be invited. Pregnant moms would be invited to do yoga, and then we'd serve some food, and before the food, and then the women with their babies would come for a baby massage. So pregnant women could actually hold real live babies, and then we'd all have food together and have a little discussion.
So creating a community around it.
Yeah. But we didn't have a place to hold this really, and so I found a church hall quite close to the birth unit, and created Vivica, and it was so it did a lot of the birth work, and there were complementary therapists. So there were acupuncturists and osteopaths and herbalists and homeopaths. And also conventional gynecologists and general practitioners and specialists.
So is this kind of with the baby's no model, like the 9 months in, 9 months out?
No, it wasn't. It was much more like the constellation model. It was the whole of life.
Okay. Because
people were being seen in their 70s, 80s, 90s, post-menopause. There was a whole pediatric service of people seen into teenage time. So it was the whole of life. it was wonderful. And if one speaks to people who used it and used it well, it was fantastic. It wasn't fantastic for me because I think I was overextended. So I was running the birth unit, writing books, and creating that. It was impossible. I took myself into the impossible.
Where did you go up there to dictate it, or was there divinity there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, into the impossible, and created immense anxiety, and unfortunately, it eventually lost a lot of money, and I was left with two emotions. Emotion one, we did some good work, and people benefited. And emotion two, this was my family money or our family money, and it was not good to lose. So it's a double one.
Of course. Well, you're right in the middle of that, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's like, right, I can go this way, or I can go that way. You presented with two models.
Yeah. And now and I also didn't enjoy being an administrator. Basically, it turned out that I turned myself into a landlord. I never wanted to be a landlord.
You're kidding me. Why would you, man? You got this depth, wealth of knowledge, wisdom, and you turn yourself into a landlord.
Into a landlord,
exactly.
Yeah. A bad one too.
Again, it's inauthentic.
Badly organized, inauthentic landlord. Yeah. I'm very pleased to be out of it.
Yeah.
And not to have to lord over anybody.
But that's pretty much around about the time we met. I think it was going to be a year after that. 2 years after that, maybe. That closed, right?
That closed, yeah. Thank goodness. Thank God.
But what a process, right?
Oh, yeah.
And how many years has that been going?
From 96 to 2014, about 18 years.
Yeah. Oh no, so it was a few years after that.
I remember coming to see you and leaving my office in Vivica and taking the train across to Gloves.
Yeah. And then wound up at my door wanting to learn how to walk, so going back to the beginning then.
Absolutely.
And then it was years later that I discovered that the reason you wanted to learn how to walk was why? Why did you want to learn how to walk?
Well, I wanted to walk up some mountains.
It was Everest, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And what was that? It was your anniversary, perhaps?
Yeah. So the first thing that I did was to walk up Mount Kenya, which I thought was an amazing thing. And also having been born in South Africa, so to be in Kenya and to walk up Mount Kenya was incredible. And then when I can't remember, I don't know, I could work it out. But when Everest was climbed by Hillary, I remember thinking, my biggest wish on earth is to go to Mount Everest. I really wanted to do that. And we eventually did it about 4 years ago. Yeah. Wendy and I went, and we went to the Everest Base Camp, and we spent the night in the Everest Base Camp, which is about 5,000 something meters. And it was just wonderful. In addition to which, we went to many of the Tibetan Buddhist temples. Yeah.
I mean, I really admire the story because it's, even where you are now. Let's go into where you are now. What's Dr. Yehudi Gordon doing now?
Well, I've got a very good
in your new profession.
Very good work-life balance.
Yeah.
So my new profession is to have a really good work-life balance.
Brilliant. So it all becomes one.
Yeah, all becomes one. And to have the same feeling of equanimity. There's a Hindu word called samabhava, of equanimity, whether it's Sunday or with Phoenix, or it's Tuesday morning with Jones Smidley.
Or Monday at 3 p.m. with
Tony,
yeah. weMove,
and Chris.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so I work 3 days a week. Or I consult 3 days a week. I do admin and the various things that one has to do now to run a medical practice.
Yeah, well, this goes back to, I remember we had that conversation and someone came in, they were assessing your medical practice.
They did.
And the guy said...
Called the Care Quality Commission.
Yeah, the Care Quality Commission. So the guy says to you, how long do you want to keep doing this for? And you came to see me and you said, you know, I was faced by this thing today and it made me feel really old and that I've got to give up what I'm doing, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, are you kidding me? How long have you been doing this, you know? You're
So
only a third. You're only, if let's say you could keep going now for another 15 years in doing what you're doing, you're only at the beginning. You're like a third of the way in. You're 5 years into it.
No, I agree.
You know?
I agree. And so I said to him, I'd like to continue to do this as long as my health and motivation stay as they are.
Yeah, as long as you can keep that work-life balance and keep the quality of life going, why not, right?
Yeah. So what I do now is I'm not officially trained, but I've done this intuitively for decades. But basically a functional medicine gynecologist, a holistic gynecologist.
Yeah.
So I love talking to people about their sleep, how much they sleep, how they eat,
microbiome,
what their motivations are, what worries them, what doesn't worry them, and then within the strictly medical framework, I'm very interested in people being in balance, nutritional balance to start, and then hormonal balance.
Yeah.
And we've now got really good systems for measuring hormones, and we've got very good bioidentical natural hormones, which mimic the ones that are not
functioning as a symptom of living in a compromised society, right?
Correct, or as a symptom of aging.
Yeah.
So I personally have very low bone density from not having done enough exercise over the decades, and
movement. Let's call it movement, not exercise.
Right? Yeah, okay, natural movement, and so I really enjoy having my hormones at a good level, because I think it's helpful to my bones, helpful to everything.
Yeah. And of course, the clients and the patients are getting 78 years of experience there, right?
And I have the great privilege. There's some people who I've known for over 35 years, and I'm now seeing their daughters, because I'm a gynecologist, so I don't see men, but their daughters, or sometimes the partners of the sons.
Yeah. I mean, it's been great watching it as an observer, someone that's known you, is that evolution.
Yeah.
You know, and also facing the fear, finding the courage to say, I'm going to change this now. I can transform.
Yeah.
You know? A bit like the ice bath.
I'd like to tell you a story. When I was 16 or 15 or 16, my dad had bellyache, and he went to see a naturopath. The naturopath was really lovely, and he just gave him a little bit of water with hydrochloric acid. He said, "You're not producing enough acid." Sorted out his digestive problem, and I really liked the guy. So the guy used to talk to me a bit and say, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Do medicine." And what kind of medicine? And I said, well, and then he gave me a book called The Scalpel and the Sword. And it was this American surgeon who went to China as a missionary, and he was a really lovely guy. So he did surgery, and he also treated people, and he was a very spiritual guy. And that's my gynecological practice. That started at 16.
So he's using Chinese medicine as well as surgery, is that what you're saying?
He's using surgery,
yeah,
Western medicine,
yeah, and
I imagine, although I can't remember the detail, I'm sure it was some Chinese medicine too. And so he was the model. And then I thought to myself, one of these days, I'd like to really practice like this naturopath is doing.
Yeah.
Sitting there, really tuned in, really helping people, and quite laid back.
And having the science there, right?
Yeah. And now, I'm very fortunate because I've got that, plus because I'm medically trained, I've got the scientific bit, and to use the tests, etc.
Yeah.
Very lucky.
Well, how you can break things down in that sense.
Yeah.
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 Right. I think we're going to wrap things up soon.
Okay.
So, going through transformation, reinventing yourself at the age of 74.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to a young gun?
How old?
Let's say someone in their, let's even say, how old are you now, Chris?
39.
Let's say someone in their 30s.
38, did you say?
39.
39.
Let's say someone in let's say 30s coming into their 40s, in that range.
Okay. I'd say to that person, you're going to be carrying a lot of past life if you believe in it, or certainly family constellation stuff, and that's going to be a double edge. One edge is going to be highly motivating, and it's going to make you, help you in your drive. There can be another side to it. And I would say to you, find yourself a really good constellator or somebody you can, and look to the dark side. And go into the dark side, and we haven't discussed this, but I have a meditation teacher, and he has been on it, all of us, but me and at me, of actually encouraging me to go into the dark side. And so, because I think that when I go into the dark side, then a lot of the...
You're talking about John?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This is John Oakley, right?
John Oakley, yeah. And when I go into the dark side, some of the things that are demonic and that are really worrying disappear. So it makes it easier to be in something called truth. And to actually live in truth is so my advice to that person was uncover it, dive into it, cover yourself with shit, smell it, eat it, do everything, and that will release the energy that needs to come out.
And remove you from living the lie.
Yeah.
It's a truth bomb right there, man. I like that.
Yeah.
I could taste the shit then, couldn't you? Huh? I love it. Thanks, man.
Okay.
Boom.
Cool.